Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, exhaustion pulling at her limbs after another long day at work. The sound of Lily's soft humming drifted in from the living room, a comforting reminder of her daughter's carefree spirit. It was these quiet moments Sarah cherished the most, the ones where the world outside faded, and it was just the two of them. The routine was simple: get Lily home from school, unpack her things, and settle in for the evening. But tonight, something felt different. As she reached for Lily's backpack to unpack it, a piece of paper slipped out, falling to the floor. It was folded several times, the creases worn from being opened and closed. Curious, Sarah picked it up, her fingers smoothing out the paper as she unfolded it. Her breath caught in her throat. The drawing was crude, the kind of artwork you'd expect from a 7-year-old. But there was something unsettling about it. It depicted their house, but standing off to the side was a tall, shadowy figure, its body twisted, limbs too long and unnatural. Its face was blank, save for two glowing eyes. Dark, jagged lines emanated from the figure, like shadows creeping toward the house. What made Sarah's skin crawl was how meticulously Lily had drawn the figure. Every line was deliberate, almost too precise for a child's imagination. "Lily," Sarah called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can you come here for a minute?" Lily bounced into the kitchen, her pigtails swaying as she skipped to her mother's side. "What's up, Mommy?" she asked, her tone innocent and light, as if nothing were wrong. Sarah held up the drawing. "Can you tell me about this picture?" "Who's that?" She pointed to the shadowy figure looming in the corner of the drawing. Lily tilted her head, examining the picture as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, that's my friend," she said, smiling. "He watches me at night." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Your friend? What's his name?" Lily shrugged. "He doesn't have a name. He just shows up sometimes and keeps me company when I can't sleep." "Where did you meet him?" Sarah's voice faltered as she stared at her daughter's bright, innocent eyes. Lily thought for a moment, tapping her chin like she was trying to remember something distant. "I don't know. He's just always been around, I guess." A chill crawled up Sarah's spine. She had heard of children having imaginary friends, but something about the way Lily described this friend unsettled her. It wasn't the kind of whimsical, light-hearted creation that children usually conjured. This felt darker, more invasive. "Has your friend ever talked to you?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone light, even as the air in the room seemed to thicken. Lily shook her head. "No, he just watches. He stands in the corner of my room sometimes, but he doesn't come close. I think he's shy." Sarah forced a smile, but inside, her mind was racing. She folded the drawing and set it aside, trying to shake off the unease. "Okay, sweetie, why don't you go wash up for dinner?" Lily skipped off without a care in the world, humming to herself as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Sarah stared after her, the drawing still burning in the back of her mind. She tried to rationalize it. Children had active imaginations, after all. But something about the figure in the drawing felt too real, too deliberate. And the fact that Lily said it watched her at night, that made her stomach churn. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the drawing in front of her, trying to make sense of it. She had been a single mother for years, ever since Lily's father left them when she was just a baby. They had a quiet life, safe and stable, with no room for anything unusual or sinister. But this felt different. The house was old, built decades before Sarah had bought it. There had been no signs of anything wrong when they moved in, no unexplained noises or strange happenings. But lately, Lily had been acting differently. She had always been an easygoing, bright child, but over the past few weeks, Sarah had noticed small changes. Lily seemed more tired, more withdrawn at times. She had been complaining about nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night and coming into Sarah's room, asking to sleep in her bed. At first, Sarah had brushed it off as normal childhood fears. But now, with the drawing in front of her, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. As she sat there, staring at the shadowy figure, she heard something. A faint sound, like footsteps, coming from the hallway outside Lily's room. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. But there was again, soft, shuffling footsteps. Her breath caught. Slowly, Sarah stood and moved toward the hallway, her pulse racing. She reached Lily's door and opened it quietly, peeking inside. Lily was fast asleep, her small body curled up under the covers, breathing softly. There was no sign of anything unusual. No figure standing in the corner, no shadows creeping across the room. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the space. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the night light in the corner. Everything looked normal, but the air felt thick, heavy, like something unseen lingered just beyond the edges of her vision. Sarah crossed the room and gently smoothed Lily's hair, reassuring herself that her daughter was safe. But as she turned to leave, her eyes caught something in the mirror across the room. Just for a second, barely more than a flicker, a shadow passed behind her. It was too fast to be sure, but it sent a cold wave of fear rushing through her. She spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, quiet and still. For the rest of the night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, her mind racing. She wanted to believe it was just her imagination, that the drawing had spooked her into seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, she knew there was something more. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the unease as she packed Lily's lunch and sent her off to school. As she watched her daughter skip down the driveway, her pigtails bouncing, Sarah made a decision. She needed to know more. After dropping Lily off, Sarah drove to the school, her mind still racing. When she arrived, she made her way to Lily's classroom and asked to speak with her teacher, Mrs. Mills. Mrs. Mills was a kind, older woman who had taught at the school for over 2 decades. She greeted Sarah with a warm smile, though her brow furrowed when Sarah asked if Lily had been acting differently. "I've noticed a few things," Mrs. Mills admitted, her voice gentle. "Lily's been talking a lot about her friend. She mentioned him a few times during class, said he visits her at home. I thought it was just a phase, a harmless imaginary friend. But now that you mention it, she's been drawing pictures of him almost every day." Sarah's heart sank. "Do you have any of the drawings?" Mrs. Mills nodded and pulled out a folder from her desk. She handed Sarah a stack of drawings, each one eerier than the last. The same shadowy figure appeared in all of them, always looming in the background, always watching. "This one worries me the most," Mrs. Mills said, pointing to a drawing of Lily's bedroom. The figure stood in the corner, closer this time, its glowing eyes fixed on Lily as she slept. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The figure wasn't just part of Lily's imagination. It was getting closer. "Has Lily said anything else about him?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Mills shook her head. "Just that he watches her. But I've noticed she's been more tired lately, like she's not getting enough sleep." Sarah nodded, her stomach twisting with fear. "Thank you for telling me. I'll keep an eye on her." As she left the school, Sarah felt like she was sinking into a nightmare. This wasn't just a child's imagination gone wild. Something was wrong. Something was coming for her daughter, and Sarah had no idea what to do. What would you do if your child started talking about a strange figure that seemed too real to be imaginary? Would you brush it off or dig deeper like Sarah did? Let me know what you think. The drive home from Lily's school felt longer than usual. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her thoughts racing as she replayed the conversation with Mrs. Mills. The drawings, the figure, the way Lily spoke about her friend so casually, as if it were normal for something to watch her at night. Fear gnawed at her, spreading from her chest to her fingertips. Whatever was happening wasn't just in Lily's head. It was something more sinister. By the time Sarah arrived back at the house, a heavy dread had settled in her gut. She walked through the front door, but the house felt different now, darker, more oppressive. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes, as though that shadowy figure from Lily's drawings was lurking just beyond her vision, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Lily's babysitter, Emily, confirming she'd pick up Lily after school. Sarah was grateful for the help. She needed time alone to figure out what was going on. With the house empty, Sarah decided to search for answers. She went to the living room and pulled out an old photo album, the one that held memories from her childhood. Maybe something from her past would offer some explanation for what was happening to Lily. She flipped through the album, her fingers brushing over photos of birthdays, family trips, and holidays. Everything seemed normal at first, smiling faces, carefree moments. But as she neared the back of the album, the photos grew less frequent. And then, in one of the last pages, her hand froze. There was a photograph of Sarah as a child, standing in front of her childhood home, holding her mother's hand. In the background, nearly hidden by the trees, was a figure, tall, shadowy, and unmistakable. The same glowing eyes, the same unnatural posture. The figure was watching them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe she had, but had pushed it away, dismissing it as a trick of the light or a figment of her imagination. But now, seeing that figure again, she knew it wasn't a coincidence. Her hands shook as she flipped to the next photo. It was a picture of her and her parents, this time indoors, inside that same childhood home. And in the reflection of the window behind them, the figure was there again, standing in the yard, just barely visible, but unmistakably present. Sarah sat back, her mind reeling. This thing, this shadow, it had been following her. No, it had been following her family. It wasn't just after Lily. It had been there all along, hiding in the edges of their lives. Her phone buzzed again. It was Emily, this time calling instead of texting. Sarah answered, her voice shaky. "Hey, Emily. Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Actually, that's why I'm calling," Emily said, her voice uncertain. "When I picked up Lily, she was talking about her friend again. But this time, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. She said he came to school with her today and was standing by the fence while the kids were playing. I didn't see anyone, but she was insistent. She said he likes to follow her, and well, it kind of freaked me out." Sarah's stomach twisted. Did she say anything else? Did she say what he looks like? There was a pause on the other end. She said he's tall and dark with big eyes. And she said he doesn't talk, just watches. I don't want to worry you, but I think something's bothering her. Sarah clenched her jaw, trying to suppress the panic rising in her chest. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll talk to her when I get home." After hanging up, Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the edge tightly as her breath came in shaky bursts. It was getting worse. Lily wasn't just seeing this thing in her room. It was following her to school, showing up in her drawings, making itself part of her life in ways that Sarah couldn't control. She had to get answers. That night, after Emily had dropped off Lily and put her to bed, Sarah sat in the living room, staring blankly at the drawings Lily had made. The same figure appeared over and over again, always watching, always standing just on the edges. No matter how much Sarah wanted to believe it was all in her daughter's imagination, she couldn't. The figure in the drawings was the same one she had seen in her old family photos. Her phone was in her hand before she even realized she was dialing the number. She called her mother, hoping for some kind of explanation, something that would help her understand what was happening. It rang 3 times before her mother answered, her voice soft and familiar. "Sarah, honey, it's late. Is everything okay?" Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Something from when I was little." Her mother hesitated. "What is it?" "There's this drawing Lily made, and it's got this figure in it. And then I was looking through old photos, and I saw the same thing. This shadow with glowing eyes. Did you ever see anything like that when I was a kid? Did something ever follow us?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost fearful. "Sarah, I thought I'd done everything to keep you safe from that." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Keep me safe from what?" Her mother sighed, the kind of deep, resigned sigh that told Sarah she had been holding this secret for a long time. "It's something that's been with our family for generations. I don't know where it came from or why it chooses us, but it's been haunting us for as long as I can remember. I thought I had stopped it when we moved. When you were little, I thought I had broken its hold on us." Sarah felt the room spinning. "What is it? What does it want?" "I don't know," her mother said softly. "But I know it feeds on fear. The more attention you give it, the stronger it gets. It's been with us for so long, always watching, always waiting. I don't know what it wants, but when it comes, it never leaves." Tears stung Sarah's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought it was gone," her mother said, her voice breaking. "I thought you were safe. I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to pass that fear on to you." Sarah gripped the phone tighter, trying to hold back the rising panic. "It's after Lily now, Mom. She sees it. She says it watches her." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh God, Sarah, you need to protect her. You can't let it get to her. How do I stop it?" Sarah's voice was trembling now, desperation creeping in. "What do I do?" "I don't know," her mother whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "I've never known. But you have to find a way. You have to be strong, Sarah. Don't let it take her." Sarah hung up, her hands shaking, the weight of her mother's words settling over her like a suffocating blanket. This thing, this shadow, had been with her family for generations. It wasn't just some imaginary friend. It was something darker, something real. And now it was after her daughter. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by Lily's bedside, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall as she slept, her face peaceful and innocent. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, hiding in the shadows, waiting. Around 2 a.m., the house was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Sarah had dozed off in the chair next to Lily's bed when she was jolted awake by a sound, a soft, whispering voice. Her heart leaped into her throat. She scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, and then she saw it. In the corner, where the shadows were thickest, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, its body shrouded in darkness, with two glowing eyes staring directly at her. Sarah's breath caught, her entire body frozen in fear. The figure didn't move, didn't come closer, but it stood there, watching, just like in Lily's drawings. Her hands shook as she reached for Lily, gently pulling her into her arms. Lily stirred, half asleep, mumbling something incoherent. Sarah backed toward the door, never taking her eyes off the figure. It remained still, almost daring her to leave the safety of the room. With Lily cradled against her chest, Sarah turned and bolted down the hallway, her heart racing, her legs shaky as she fled the room. She didn't stop until she reached the living room, where she collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Lily stirred in her arms, her voice sleepy and soft. "Mommy, why did you bring me out here?" Sarah held her close, her breath ragged. I wanted to keep you close, sweetie. That's all." Lily nodded, already drifting back to sleep, but Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the hallway. She knew the figure was still there, watching, waiting, and this time, she wasn't sure if she could stop it. If you discovered your family had been haunted for generations by something dark and terrifying, what would you do? How would you protect your child? Let me know what you'd do in Sarah's situation. Sarah hadn't slept since the night she saw the figure in Lily's room. It had been standing there, watching her just like in the drawings. It was real, and no matter how much she wanted to rationalize it, to chalk it up to stress or exhaustion, she couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Days passed, but Sarah's fear only grew. The shadow lingered, always there in the periphery. At night in the corners of her home, in Lily's dreams, and even in Sarah's own nightmares. Lily's behavior had shifted too. She was more withdrawn, tired, and increasingly anxious. She asked to sleep in Sarah's bed every night, but even then, Lily would wake up screaming, her little body trembling as she talked about the figure watching her from the dark. It was getting worse. That afternoon, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open as she searched frantically for answers. She had scoured the internet, looking for anything that could explain what was happening to her family. But everything she found seemed too far-fetched. Folklore about shadow people, theories about dark spirits that attach themselves to families. It was too much, too vague. Nothing concrete. Her phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She saw her mother's name flash across the screen and hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mom!" Her mother's voice was tense. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this. About what's happening to Lily. I think I might know someone who can help." "Who?" Sarah's voice cracked, desperate for any kind of solution. "An old friend of your grandmother's. Her name is Evelyn. She's not exactly a traditional healer, but she understands things like this. She helped me once when you were a baby. I didn't think I'd need her again, but now." Her mother trailed off, her voice heavy with guilt. Sarah was quiet, her mind racing. "Why didn't you call her sooner?" "I didn't think it would come back," her mother admitted. "I didn't think it would find you again." A few days later, Sarah stood at the doorstep of Evelyn's house, Lily clinging to her side. The house was tucked away on the edge of town, small and old, with ivy creeping up its stone walls. It looked almost out of place, like it had been forgotten by time. Sarah took a deep breath and knocked. The door creaked open, and an elderly woman with sharp, piercing eyes and silver hair peered out. She looked at Sarah for a long moment, then down at Lily. "You're here because of the shadow," Evelyn said simply, her voice raspy but strong. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, my mother said you could help." Evelyn stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. The inside of the house was dim, filled with the scent of dried herbs and candle wax. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with old books, vials of strange liquids, and crystals of every shape and color. The air felt thick, charged with something Sarah couldn't quite explain. Evelyn led them into a small living room and gestured for Sarah to sit on an old, worn couch. Lily sat close to her, clutching Sarah's arm tightly. Evelyn watched them carefully before speaking. "I know what's following you," she said, her voice calm but serious. "It's been with your family for generations. A shadow entity. It feeds on fear, thrives in the dark spaces of the mind. It's drawn to children, especially those who are vulnerable, and it's growing stronger." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Why is it here? Why us?" Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. "Many years ago, one of your ancestors made a pact with a spirit. In exchange for wealth and power, they promised their firstborn child to the shadow. But instead of just taking one child, the shadow became attached to your bloodline, following your family, generation after generation, waiting to claim the souls of the firstborns when they reached a certain age." Sarah's breath caught. "And it's come for Lily?" Evelyn nodded grimly. "Yes, it's been waiting, watching her since she was born. It can't take her yet, but as her 8th birthday approaches, it grows closer. That's when it's strongest." Lily's 8th birthday was only a week away. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped Lily tighter, trying to steady herself. "What can I do? How do I stop it?" Evelyn stood, walking over to one of the shelves. She pulled out an old, leather-bound book and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. "There is a way to sever the connection, to break the curse once and for all. But it's dangerous. You'll need to confront the shadow directly." Sarah's pulse quickened. "How?" "You must perform a ritual," Evelyn explained, opening the book to a page filled with strange symbols and incantations. "The shadow feeds on fear, so you must face it without giving in to that fear. You'll need to create a barrier of protection around Lily while you draw the shadow out. Once it reveals itself, you'll have a brief moment to banish it. But if you falter, if you let fear consume you, it will take you instead. The weight of Evelyn's words settled over Sarah like a heavy fog. The thought of facing that thing, of standing against it to protect Lily, terrified her. But she had no choice. If she didn't stop it, Lily would be lost to the shadow. That night, Sarah sat in Lily's room, the old book Evelyn had given her resting in her lap. The candles Evelyn had instructed her to use were placed in a circle around Lily's bed, their soft light flickering in the dark. Lily was fast asleep, her small body curled up under the covers, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the edges of the room. Sarah's heart pounded as she began the ritual, chanting the words Evelyn had taught her. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, creeping closer, as if responding to the words Sarah was speaking. And then she felt it, the cold, suffocating weight of the shadow. Her breath hitched as the temperature in the room plummeted. The candles flickered violently, their flames struggling to stay lit. Sarah's hands shook as she continued the incantation, her voice trembling as she forced herself to keep going. Suddenly, the shadows in the room seemed to ripple, and there it was. The figure. It stood at the foot of Lily's bed, its tall, twisted form more solid now than it had ever been before. Its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah, unblinking, as if daring her to continue. Sarah's pulse raced, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she faltered now, it would take Lily. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching across the room, darkening everything in its path. Sarah could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into her bones, chilling her to the core. It loomed over her, a presence so overwhelming it was hard to breathe. "You can't have her," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "You can't take her." The shadow didn't respond, but its eyes glowed brighter, more intense. It was waiting, feeding off her fear. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She thought of Lily, of her laughter, her smiles, the way she hugged her at the end of a long day. Lily needed her, and there was nothing Sarah wouldn't do to protect her. She opened her eyes, meeting the shadow's gaze head-on. "You can't have her," she repeated, louder this time, her voice firm. "You'll never take her." The shadow flickered, its form wavering as if it were unsure. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. The shadow lunged toward her, its cold fingers reaching for her throat. Sarah gasped, her heart racing as the shadow's presence washed over her, suffocating her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She continued the incantation, forcing the words out even as the darkness pressed in on her. Just as the shadow's hand reached her, there was a sharp burst of light, a blinding flash that filled the room. The shadow recoiled, its form breaking apart, dissolving into the air like smoke. Sarah collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the room returned to normal. The candles flickered back to life, their warm glow filling the space once more. It was gone. She had done it. Hours later, Sarah sat by Lily's bed, her body exhausted but her heart light. The shadow was gone. The curse was broken. Lily was safe. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, Sarah leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. She had faced the darkness and won. And now, finally, the nightmare was over. Would you be able to face your darkest fears to protect someone you love, even if it meant risking everything? How far would you go to protect your family? Let me know your thoughts. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft, golden light into Lily's room as Sarah sat by her daughter's bed, her body still trembling from the night's events. The shadow was gone. The suffocating presence, the glowing eyes, the terror that had stalked her family for generations. It was all over. But Sarah couldn't shake the lingering dread in her chest, a hollow feeling that had settled deep inside her. She had won, but the victory felt fragile, like it could unravel at any moment. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked up at Sarah, her face calm, the dark circles under her eyes already fading. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. Sarah smiled through her exhaustion, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "Hey, sweetie, how do you feel?" Lily yawned and stretched, her small body curling under the blankets. "Better. I don't feel scared anymore. Is the bad man gone?" Sarah's throat tightened, and she nodded, holding back the tears that had been building up since the moment she'd banished the shadow. "Yes, Lily. He's gone. You're safe now." Lily smiled, her eyes drifting shut again as she mumbled, "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, baby," Sarah whispered, her heart swelling with a fierce sense of protection and relief. As Lily drifted back to sleep, Sarah stood, her legs shaky but determined. She knew what she had to do. The shadow might be gone from Lily's life, but its hold on Sarah wasn't entirely broken. The way it had lunged for her, the suffocating cold that had enveloped her, it was more than just a close call. Something inside Sarah had changed, and she could feel it, like a faint shadow lingering in her chest, a piece of the darkness that hadn't fully let go. She needed to talk to Evelyn. She had to understand what had happened, and if there were any lasting consequences to the ritual. Later that afternoon, Sarah drove back to Evelyn's house, her thoughts heavy with questions she didn't know how to ask. The old woman greeted her at the door, her sharp eyes studying Sarah for a moment before she motioned her inside. "I've been expecting you," Evelyn said, her voice calm but knowing. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" The shadow didn't fully let go. Sarah sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know what it is, but it feels different, like it's still with me somehow. I don't think it's gone completely." Evelyn nodded, her expression grave. "The shadow was strong, stronger than any I've seen in a long time. When you performed the ritual, you weakened it enough to save Lily, but in doing so, you absorbed part of its presence. That's why you feel the way you do. The curse isn't fully broken." Sarah's heart sank. "So, what does that mean? Am I cursed now? Will it come after me?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, it won't come after you the same way it came after Lily. It doesn't want to claim you. It can't. But part of it has attached itself to you. It feeds on fear, remember? And now it's latched onto the fear you felt during the ritual. That fear gave it a foothold in your soul." Sarah's breath caught. "So, what do I do? How do I get rid of it?" Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes softening. "The only way to sever its hold on you is to face your fear again. But this time, you must be completely free of it. It's not a matter of rituals or incantations now. It's about you. If you can find a way to confront your fear without letting it control you, the shadow will lose its grip." Sarah swallowed hard. "But how? How do I confront something like that? It's not just a nightmare, it's real." Evelyn smiled faintly. "The shadow feeds on your fear, but it's still just a shadow. It only has the power you give it. You must find the strength to take back that power. You've already done it once for Lily. Now you need to do it for yourself." The next few days passed in a haze. Sarah tried to go about her life as usual, focusing on work, on Lily, on anything that could distract her from the gnawing presence she felt inside. But every night, she lay awake, feeling the cold edge of the shadow lingering just beneath the surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she knew it wouldn't go away on its own. One night, after tucking Lily into bed, Sarah found herself standing in front of the mirror in her bathroom. She stared at her reflection, trying to find any trace of the woman she used to be before the shadow had crept into her life. But all she saw was exhaustion, fear, a woman who had fought for her daughter, but was now losing herself. Her breath hitched as the lights flickered, casting the room into brief moments of darkness. When the light returned, she swore she saw a flicker of movement behind her, the shadow lurking just out of sight. Her pulse quickened, the familiar grip of fear tightening around her chest. But this time, instead of running, Sarah turned and faced it. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke aloud. "I'm not afraid of you." Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. She felt the cold presence swirl around her, a suffocating weight pressing in. But she didn't move. She didn't give in to the fear. "I faced you once," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. "I won. You don't have any power over me." The shadow seemed to pulse, a chill sweeping through the room. The lights flickered again, but Sarah didn't back down. She kept her eyes closed, her mind focused on the truth. "I am not afraid of you." The weight lifted, the air in the room warming as the cold presence faded. The lights stopped flickering. Slowly, Sarah opened her eyes, her reflection steady and clear in the mirror. The shadow was gone. The next morning, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The darkness that had clung to her was gone, and for the first time in a long while, she felt free. The weight of fear, of the unknown, no longer suffocated her. As she sat at the breakfast table with Lily, watching her daughter laugh and eat her cereal, Sarah knew that everything she had gone through had been worth it. She had protected Lily, fought for her family, and in the end, she had reclaimed her own strength. Evelyn had been right. The shadow only had power over her because she had given it that power. Once she took it back, it had nothing left to hold on to. That evening, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, Lily wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy. I'm not scared anymore." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm not scared anymore either, baby. We're safe now." And as she turned off the light and closed the door, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The shadows in the room were just that, shadows. Nothing more. Nothing that could hurt them again. The nightmare was finally over. Could you face your deepest fear, knowing that it held power over you only as long as you allowed it to? Would you be able to reclaim your strength, as Sarah did? Let me know what you think.